Welcome everyone. Good to see you all on another reading stream. Tonight I will be reading chapters 5 through 7. Because two of them are only about 8 pages long. One of them is about 12 pages long, so I figured I'll cover like those three. And then Thursday I'll be reading chapters 8 and 9, and then finishing, well, technically book 5, because it should be 6 books. But part 1 of Return of the King, I'll be finishing it a week from today. Basically just reading the last chapter, chapter 10. And then beginning book 6, part 2 of Return of the King, either Thanksgiving, which will probably not be the case. If I do any stream Thanksgiving evening, it'll probably be a gaming stream, because, well, the tryptophan will probably be kicking my ass after the turkey dinner. So I'm most likely be moving the reading stream to Friday, and reading the first chapter of book 6, or part 2 of Return of the King. Alright, let me just So beginning chapter 5, which is the Ride of the Rohirrim. But welcome everyone, good to see you all. So hope you enjoy the reading. Because like I said in the description, the enemy has laid siege to Gondor. King Theoden has shown up, well, just about the last possible minutes. I'll be getting into the Ride of the Rohirrim, the Battle of Pelennor Fields, and so forth. Alright, but welcome everyone. It was dark, and Merry could see nothing as he lay on the ground, rolled in a blanket. Yet though the night was airless and windless, all about him hidden trees were sighing softly. He lifted his head, then he heard it again, a sound like faint drums on the wooded hills and mountain steps. The throb would cease suddenly, and then be taken up again at some other point, now nearer, now further off. He wondered if the watchman had heard it. He could not see them, but he knew that all around him were the companies of the Rohirrim. He could smell the horses in the dark, and could hear their shiftings and their soft stamping on the needle-covered ground. The host was Biovac, in the pine woods that clustered about Elenach Beacon, a tall hill standing up from the long ridges of the Druidon's forest that lay beside the great road in East Anorian. Tired as he was, Merry could not sleep. He had written now for 4 days on end, and the ever-deepening gloom had slowly weighed down his heart. He began to wonder why he had been so eager to come, when he had been given every excuse, even his lord's command, to stay behind. He wondered, too, if the old king knew that he had been disobeyed and was angry. Perhaps not. There seemed to be some understanding between Durnhelm and Elfhelm, the marshal who commanded the Ered in which they were riding. He and all his men ignored Merry and pretended not to hear if he spoke. He might have been he might have been just another bag that Durnhelm was carrying. Durnhelm was no comfort. He never spoke to anyone. Merry felt small, unwanted, and lonely. Now the time was anxious, and the host was in peril. They were less than a day's ride from the outwalls of Minas Tirith that encircled the townlands. Scouts had been sent ahead. Some had not returned. Others hastening back had reported that the road was held in force against them. A host of the enemy was encamped upon it, 3 miles west of Amundine, and some strength of men was already thrusting along the road, and was no more than 3 leagues away. Orcs were roving in the hills and woods along the roadside. The king and Eomer held council in the watches of the nights. Merry wanted somebody to talk to, and he thought of Pippin, but that only increased his restlessness. Poor Pippin, shut up in the great city of stone, lonely and afraid. Merry wished he was a tall rider like Eomer and could blow a horn or something and go galloping to his rescue. He sat up, listening to the drums that were beating again, now near at hand. Presently he heard voices speaking low, and he saw dim, half-shrouded lanterns passing through the trees. Men nearby began to move uncertainly in the dark. A tall figure loomed up and stumbled over him, cursing the tree roots. He recognized the voice of Elfhelm, the marshal. Welcome, everyone. I am not a tree root, sir, he said, nor a bag, but a bruised hobbit. The least you can do in amends is to tell me what is afoot. Anything that can keep so in this devil's murk, answered Elfhelm, but my lord sends word that we must set ourselves in readiness. Orders may come for a sudden move. Is the enemy coming then? Asked Merry anxiously. Are those their drums? I began to think I was imagining them, as no one else seemed to take any notice of them. Nay, nay, said Elfhelm. The enemy is on the road, not in the hills. You hear the wozes, the wild men of the woods. Thus they talk together from afar. They still haunt Druidan forest, it is said. Remnants of an older time they be, living few and secretly, wild and weary as the beasts. They go not to war with Gondor or the Mark, but now they are troubled by the darkness and the coming of the orcs. They fear lest the dark years be returning, as seems likely enough. Let us be thankful that they are not hunting us, for they use poisoned arrows, it is said, and they are woodcrafty beyond compare. But they have offered their services to Theoden. Even now, one of their headmen is being taken to the king. Yonder go the lights. So much I have heard, but no more, and now I must busy myself with my lord's commands. Pack yourself up, Master Bag. He vanished into the shadows. Merry did not like this talk of wild men and poisoned darts, but quite apart from that, a great weight of dread was on him. Waiting was unbearable. He longed to know what was going to happen. He got up and soon was walking warily in pursuit of the last lantern, before it disappeared among the trees. Presently he came to an open space, where a small tent had been set up for the king under a great tree. A large lantern, covered above, was hanging from a bough, and cast a pale circle of light below. There sat Theoden and Éomer, and before them on the ground sat a strange squat shape of a man, gnarled as an old stone, and the hairs of his scanty beard straggled on his lumpy chin like dry moss. He was short-legged and fat-armed, thick and stumpy, and clad only with grass about his waist. Merry felt that he had seen him before somewhere, and suddenly he remembered the Pucklemen of Donharrow. Here was one of those old images brought to life, or maybe a creature descended in true line through endless years from the models used by the forgotten craftsmen long ago. There was a silence as Merry crept nearer, and then the wild man began to speak, in answer to some question, it seemed. His voice was deep and guttural, yet to Merry's surprise he spoke the common speech, though in halting fashion and uncouth words were mingled with it. No, father of horsemen, he said, we fight not. Hunt only. Kill Gorgoon in the woods. Hate orc folk. You hate Gorgoon too. We help you as we can. Wild men have long ears and long eyes, know all paths. Wild men live here before stone houses, before tall men come up out of water. Tall men, if I remember my lore correctly, he's referring to the Númenóreans. Númenóreans were actually, like, 8-9 feet tall. They were tall. So when he says tall men come up out of water, he's saying before the Númenóreans stepped foot into Middle-earth. The Númenóreans, when you watch Rings of Power, well, you can't find 8 to 9 feet tall actors, generally. But Númenóreans were tall. So when he says tall men, they were basketball player tall. Okay. But our need is for aid in battle, said Éomer. How will you and your folk help us? Bring news, said the wild man. We look out from hills, we climb big mountain and look down. Stone City is shut, fire burns there outside. Now inside, too. You wish to come there? Then you must be quick. But Gorgoon and men out of far away. He waved a short and gnarled arm eastward. Sit on horse road. Very many, more than horsemen. How do you know that, said Éomer. The old man's flat face and dark eyes showed nothing, but his voice was sullen with displeasure. Wild men are wild, free, but not children, he answered. I am great head man. Gonbori gone. I count many things. Stars in sky, leaves on trees, men in the dark. You have a score of scores counted 10 times in 5. They have more. Big fight, and who will win? And many more walk round walls of stone houses. Alas, he speaks all too shrewdly. Well, the man who's talking about tall men is not a hobbit, Mike. So, yes, to hobbits, everyone's a tall man. But the man who's talking is not a hobbit. He's average size. So when he's talking about the tall men, he's referring to the Númenóreans. They were very tall. Anyway. Alas, he speaks all too shrewdly, said Theoden, and our scouts say that they have cast trenches and stakes across the road. We cannot sweep them away in sudden onset. And yet we need great haste, said Éomer. Mundburg is on fire. Let Gonbori Gon finish, said the wild man. More than one road he knows. He will lead you by road where no pits are, no Gorgoon walk, only wild men and beasts. Many paths were made when Stonehouse folks were stronger. They carved hills as hunters carve beast flesh. Wild men think they ate stone for food. They went through Druidan to Rimmon with great wains. They go no longer. Road is forgotten, but not by wild men. Over hill and behind hill it lies, still under grass and tree. There behind Rimmon and down to Dean, and back at the end to Horseman's Road. Wild men will show you that road. Then you will kill Gorgoon and drive away bad dark with bright iron. Sorry. And wild men can go back to sleep in the wild woods. Eomer and the king spoke together in their own tongue. At length Theoden turned to the wild man. We will receive your offer, he said, for though we leave a host of foes behind, what matter? If the stone city falls, then we shall have no returning. If it is saved, then the orc host itself will be cut off. If you are faithful, Gonbarigon, then we will give you rich reward, and you will have friendship of the mark forever. Dead men are not friends to living men, and give them no gifts, said the wild man. But if you live after the darkness and leave wild men alone in the woods, and do not hunt them like beasts anymore, Gonbarigon, will not lead you into a trap. He will go himself with father of horsemen, and if he leads you wrong, you will kill him. So be it, said Theoden. How long will it take to pass by the enemy and come back to the road, asked Eomer. We must go at foot pace, if you guide us, and I doubt not the way is narrow. Wild men go quick on feet, said Gon. Way is wide for 4 horses in Stonewain Valley yonder, he waved his hand southwards, but narrow at beginning and at end. Wild men can walk from here to Dean between sunrise and noon. Then we must allow at least 7 hours for the leader, said Eomer, but we must reckon rather on some 10 hours for all. Things unforeseen may hinder us, and if our host is all strung out, it will be long ere it can be set in order when we issue from the hills. What is the hour now? Sorry, my voice broke. Who knows, said Theoden. All is night now. It is all dark, but it is not all night, said Gon. When sun comes, we feel her, even when she is hidden. Already she climbs over east mountains. It is the opening of day in the sky fields. Then we must set out as soon as it may be, said Eomer. Even so, we cannot hope to come to Gondor's aid today. Merry waited to hear no more, but slipped away to get ready for the summons to the march. This was the last stage before the battle. It did not seem likely to him that many of them would survive it, but he thought of Pippin and the flames in Minas Tirith and thrust down his own dread. All went well that day, and no sight or sound had they of the enemy, waiting to waylay them. The wild men had put out a screen of wary hunters, so that no orc or roving spy should learn of the movements in the hills. The light was more dim than ever as they drew nearer to the beleaguered city, and the riders passed in long files like dark shadows of men and horses. Each company was guided by a wild woodman, but old Gon walked beside the king. The start had been slower than was hoped, for it had taken time for the riders walking and leading their horses to find paths over the thickly wooded ridges behind their camp and down into the hidden Stonewain Valley. It was late in the afternoon when the leaders came to wide grey thickets stretching beyond the eastward side of Amundine and masking a great gap in the line of hills from the Nordal to Dean ran east and west. Through the gap, the forgotten Wain Road long ago had run down, back into the main horseway from the city through Anorian, but now for many lives of men, trees had had their way with it, and it had vanished, broken, and buried under the leaves of uncounted years. But the thicket offered to the riders their last hope of cover before they went into open battle, for beyond them lay the road and the plains of Anduin, while east and southwards the slopes were bare and rocky, as the writhen hills gathered themselves together and climbed up, bastion upon bastion, into the great mass and shoulders of the Mindoluin. The leading company was halted, and as those behind filed up out of the trough of the Stonewain Valley, they spread out and passed to camping places under the grey trees. The king summoned the captains to council. Eomer sent out scouts to spy upon the road, but old Gon shook his head. No good to send horsemen, he said. Wild men have already seen all that can be seen in the bad air. They'll come soon, and speak to me here. The captains came, and then out of the trees crept warily other pupil shapes, so like old Gon that Merry could hardly tell them apart. They spoke to Gon in a strange throaty language. Presently Gon turned to the king. Wild men say many things, he said. First, be weary. Still many men in camp beyond Dean, an hour's walk yonder. He waved his arm west towards the black beacon. But none to see between here and the stone folks' new walls. Many busy there. Walls to stand up no longer. Gorgoon knocked them down with earth thunder and with clubs of black iron. They are unweary and do not look about them. They think their friends watch all roads. At that old Gon made a curious gurgling noise, and it seemed like he was laughing. Good tidings, cried Eomer. Even in this gloom, hope gleams again. Our enemy's devices ought serve us in this despite. The accursed darkness itself has been a cloak to us, and now, lusting to destroy Gondor and throw it down stone from stone, his works have taken away my greatest fear. The outlaw could have been held long against us. Now we can sweep through, if once we win so far. Once again, I thank you, Gondor of the woods, said Theoden. Good fortune go with you for tidings and for guidance. Kill Gorgoon, kill Orcfolk. No other words, please, wild men, answered Gon. Drive away bad air and darkness with bright iron. To do these things we have ridden far, said the king, and we shall attempt them. But what we shall achieve only tomorrow will show. Gon squatted down and touched the earth with his horny brow, in token of farewell, and he got up as if to depart. But suddenly he stood looking up like some startled woodland animal, sniffing a strange air. A light came in his eyes. Wind is changing, he cried, and with that, in a twinkling as it seemed, he and his fellows had vanished into the glooms, never to be seen by any rider of Rohan again. Not long after, far away eastward, the faint drums throbbed again. Yet to no heart, and all the host came any fear that the wild men were unfaithful, strange and unlovely though they might appear. We need no further guidance, said Elfhelm, for there are riders in the host who have ridden down to Munburg in days of peace. I, for one. When we come to the road, it will veer south, and there will lie before us still 7 leagues ere we reach the wall of the townlands. Along most of that way, there is much grass on either side of the road. On that stretch, the errant riders of Gondor reckon to make their greatest speed. We may ride it swiftly and without great rumor. And since we must look for fell deeds and the need of all our strength, said Eomer, I counsel that we rest now and set out hence by night. And so time are going that we come upon the fields when had to clear my throat. When tomorrow is as light as it will be, or when our Lord gives a signal. To this the king assented, and the captains departed. But soon Elfhelm returned. The scouts have found naught to report beyond the grey wood, Lord, he said, save 2 men only, 2 dead men and 2 dead horses. Well, said Eomer, what of it? This lord, they were errand riders of Gondor. Hergon was one, maybe. At least his hand still clasped the red arrow, but his head was hewn off. And this also, it would seem by the signs that they were fleeing westward when they fell. As I read it, they found the enemy already on the outwall, or assailing it when they returned. And that would be 2 nights ago, if they used fresh horses from the post, as is their wont. They could not reach the city and turned back. Alas, said Theoden, and Denethor has heard no news of our riding and will despair of our coming. Need brooks no delay, yet late is better than never, said Eomer. And mayhap in this time shall the old saw be proved truer than ever before since men spoke with mouth. It was night. On either side of the road the host of Rohan was moving silently. Now the road passing out about the skirts of Mindalluin turned southward. Far away and almost straight ahead there was a red glow under the black sky, and the sides of the great mountain loomed dark against it. They were drawing nearer the Rammas of the Pelennor, but the day was not yet come. The king rode in the midst of the leading company, his household men about him. Elfhelm's Ered came next, and now Merry noticed that Durnhelm had left his place and in the darkness was moving steadily forward, until at last he was riding just in rear of the king's guard. There came a check. Merry heard voices in front, speaking softly. Outriders had come back who had ventured forward almost to the wall. They came to the king. There are great fires, Lord, said one. The city is all set about with flame, and the field is full of foes. But all seem drawn off to the assault. As well as we could guess, there are few left upon the outwall, and they are heedless, busy in destruction. Do you remember the wild man's words, Lord, said another? I live upon the open wold in days of peace. Widfarah is my name, and to me also the air brings messages. Already the wind is turning. There comes to a breath out of the south. There's a sea tang in it, faint though it may be. The morning will bring new things. Above the reek it will be dawn when you pass the wall. Again, welcome everyone. If you speak truly, Widfarah, then may you live beyond this day in years of blessedness, said Theoden. He turned to the men of his household who were near, and he spoke now in clear voice, so that many also of the riders of the first Eorod heard him. Now is the hour come, riders of the Mark, sons of Earl. Foes and fire are before you, and your homes are far behind. Yet though you fight upon an alien field, the glory that you reap there shall be your own forever. Oaths ye have taken, now fulfill them all, to lord and land and league of friendship. Men clashed spear upon shield. Eomer, my son, you lead the first Ered, said Theoden, and it shall go behind the king's banner in the center. Elfhelm, lead your company to the right when we pass the wall, and Grimbold, shall lead us towards the left. Let the other companies behind follow these three that lead, as they have chance. Strike wherever the enemy gathers. Other plans we cannot make, for we know not yet how things stand upon the field. Forth now, and fear no darkness. The leading company rode off as swiftly as they could, for it was still deep dark, whatever the change Woodford might forebode. Merry was riding behind Durnhelm, clutching with the left hand, while with the other he tried to loosen the sword in its sheath. He felt now bitterly the truth of the old king's words. In such a battle, what would you do, Meriadoc? Just this, he thought, encumber a rider and hope at best to stay in my seat, and not be pounded to death by galloping hoofs. It was no more than a league to where the outwalls had stood. They soon reached them, too soon for Merry. Wild cries broke out, and there was some clash of arms, but it was brief. The orcs busy about the walls were few and amazed, and they were quickly slain or driven off. Before the ruin of the north gates and the Rammas, the king halted again. The first Ered drew up behind him, and about him, on either side, Durnhelm kept close to the king. The Welfhelm's company was way on the right. Grimbold's men turned aside and passed around to a great gap in the wall further eastward. Merry peered from behind Durnhelm's back. Far away, maybe 10 miles or more, there was a great burning, but between it and the riders, lines of fire blazed in the vast crescent, at the nearest point less than a league distant. He could make out little more on the dark plain, and as yet he neither saw any hope of morning, nor felt any wind, changed or unchanged. Now silently the host of Rohan moved forward into the field of Gondor, pouring in slowly but steadily like the rising tide through breaches in a dike that men have thought secure. But the mind and will of the Black Captain were bent wholly on the falling city, and as yet no tidings came to him warning that his designs held any flaw. After a while the king led his men away somewhat eastward, to come between the fires of the siege and the outer fields. Still they were unchallenged, and still Theoden gave no signal. At last he halted once again. The city was now nearer. A smell of burning was in the air, and a very shadow of death. The horses were uneasy. But the king sat upon Snowmane, motionless, gazing upon the agony of Minas Tirith, as if stricken suddenly by anguish, or by dread. He seemed to shrink down, cowed by age. Merry himself felt as if a great weight of horror and doubt had settled on him. His heart beat slowly. Time seemed poised in uncertainty. They were too late. Too late was worse than never. Perhaps Theoden would quail, bow his old head, turn, slink away to hide in the hills. Then suddenly Merry felt it at last, beyond doubt, a change. Wind was in his face, light was glimmering. Far, far away, in the south, the clouds could be dimly seen as remote gray shapes, rolling up, drifting. Morning lay beyond them. But at the same moment there was a flash, as if lightning had sprung from the earth beneath the city. For a searing second it stood dazzling far off in black and white, its topmost tower like a glittering needle, and then as the darkness closed again, there came roiling over the fields a great boom. Alright, my eyebrows are being talked about. At that sound, the bent shape of the king sprang suddenly erect. Tall and proud he seemed again, and arising in the stirrups he cried in a loud voice, more clear than any there had ever heard a mortal man achieve before. Arise, arise, riders of Theoden! Fell deeds awake, fire and slaughter. Spears shall be shaken, shields be splintered. A sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises. Ride now, ride now, ride to Gondor. With that he seized a great horn from Guthlaf, his banner bearer, and he blew such a blast upon it, it burst asunder. And straightway, all the horns in the host were lifted up in music, and the blowing of the horns of Rohan in that hour was like a storm upon the plain, and the thunder in the mountains. Ride now, ride to Gondor! Suddenly the king cried to Snowmane, and the horse sprang away. Behind him his banner blew in the wind, white horse upon a field of green, but he outpaced it. After him thundered the knights of his house, but he was ever before them. Aemir rode there, the white horsetail on his helm floating in his speed, and the front of the first Ered roared like a daybreaker foaming to the shore, but Theoden could not be overtaken. Thay, he seemed, or the battle fury of his fathers ran like a new fire in his veins, and he was borne up on Snowmane like a god of old, even as Orome the Great in the battle of the Valar, when the world was young. His golden shield was uncovered, and lo, it was shown like an image of the sun, and the grass flamed into green about the white feet on his steed. For morning came, morning and a wind from the sea, and darkness was removed, and the host of Mordor wailed, and terror took them, and they fled and died, and the hooves of wrath rode over them. And then all the hosts of Rohan burst into song, and they sang as they slew. For the joy of battle was on them, and the sound of their singing was fair and terrible came even to the city. And take a break to take a drink. And that ends chapter 5. The Ride of the Rohirrim. I still have it marked in my book. His last Toxic Mail had sent a super chat to Mazza for him to read a page of The Lord of the Rings. I still have the bookmark where he marking the page that I had just read for him to read. And he dodged. He's a dodger. But now starts chapter 6, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. But it was no orc chieftain or brigand that led the assault upon Gondor. The darkness was breaking too soon, before the date that his master had set for it. Fortune had betrayed him for the moment, and the world had turned against him. Victory is slipping from his grasp, even as he stretched out his hand to seize it. But his arm was long. He was still in command, wielding great powers. King, Ringwraith, Lord of the Nazgul, he had many weapons. He left the gate and vanished. Theoden, king of the Mark, had reached the road from the gate to the river, and he turned towards the city that was now less than a mile distant. He slackened his speed a little, seeking new foes, and his knights came about him, and Durnhelm was with them. Ahead nearer the walls, Elfhelm's men were among the siege engines, hewing, slaying, and driving their foes into the fire pits. Well nigh all the northern half of the Pelennor was overrun, and their camps were blazing. Orcs were flying towards the river like herds before the hunters, and the Rohirrim went hither and thither at their will. But they had not yet overthrown the siege, nor won the gate. Many foes stood before it, and on the further half of the plain were other hosts still unfought. Southward beyond the road lay the main force of the Rohirrim, and there their horsemen were gathered about the standard of their chieftain. And he looked out, and in the growing light he saw the banner of the king, and that it was far ahead of the battle with few men about it. Then he was filled with a red wrath, and shouted aloud, and displaying his standard, black serpent upon scarlet, he came against the white horse in the green with great press of men, and the drawing of the scimitars of the Southrons was like a glittering of stars. Then Theoden was aware of him, and would not wait for his onset, but crying to Snowmane, he charged headlong to greet him. Great was the clash of their meeting, but the white fury of the Northmen burned the hotter, and more skilled was their knighthood with long spears and bitter. Fewer were they, but they clove through the Southrons like a firebolt in the forest. Right through the press drove Theoden, Thangol's son, and his spear was shivered as he threw down their chieftain. Out swept his sword, and he spurred to the standard, huge staff and bearer, and the black serpent foundered. Then all that was left unslain of their cavalry turned and fled far away. But lo, suddenly, in the midst of the glory of the king, and his golden shield was dimmed. The new morning was blotted from the sky. Dark fell about him. Horses reared and screamed. Men cast from the saddle lay groveling on the ground. To me, cried Theoden, up Eorlingas, fear no darkness. But Snowmane, wild with terror, stood up on high, fighting with the air, and then with a great scream he crashed upon his side. A black dart had pierced him. The king fell beneath him. The great shadow descended like a fallen cloud, and behold, it was a winged creature. If bird, then greater than all other birds, and it was naked. And neither quill nor feather did it bear, and its vast pinions were as webs of hide between horned fingers, and it stank. A creature of an older world, maybe it was, whose kind lingered in forgotten mountains cold beneath the moon, outstayed their day, and in hideous eyrie bred their last untimely brood, apt to evil. And the Dark Lord took it, and nursed it with fell meats, until it grew beyond the measure of all other things that fly. And he gave it to his servant, to be his steed. Down it came, and then, folding its fingered webs, it gave a croaking cry, and settled upon the body of Snowmane, digging in its claws, stooping its long, naked neck. Upon it sat a shape, black-mantled, huge and threatening. A crown of steel he bore, but between rim and robe naught was there to see, save only a deadly gleam of eyes, the Lord of the Nazgul. To the air he had returned, summoning his steed ere the darkness failed. And now he was come again, bringing ruin, turning hope to despair, and victory to death. A great black mace he wielded. Welcome, everyone. But Theoden was not utterly forsaken. The knights of his house lay slain about him, or only mastered by the dark madness of their steeds, or borne far away. Yet one stood there still. Durnhelm the young, faithful beyond fear, and he wept, for he had loved his lord as a father. Right through the charge, Merry had been borne unharmed behind him, until the shadow came, and then Windfall had thrown them in his terror, and now ran wild upon the plain. Merry crawled on all fours, like a dazed beast, and such a horror was on him that he was blind and sick. King's man, his heart cried within him. You must stay by him. As a father you shall be to me, you said, but his will made no answer, and his body shook. He dared not open his eyes or look up. Then out of the blackness in his mouth he thought that he heard Durnhelm speaking. Yet now the voice seemed strange, recalling some other voice that he had known. Begone, foul Drummer Lake, Lord of Carrion, leave the dead in peace. A cold voice answered, Come not between the Nazgul and his prey, or he will not slay thee in thy turn. He will bear thee away to the houses of lamentation, beyond all darkness, where thy flesh shall be devoured and thy shriveled mind be left naked to the lidless eye. A sword rang as it was drawn. Do what you will, but I will hinder it, if I may. Hinder me, thou fool, no living man may hinder me. Then Merry heard of all sounds in that hour the strangest. It seemed that Durnhelm laughed, and the clear voice was like the ring of steel. But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. Eowyn, I am, Eowyn's daughter. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Begone, if you be not deathless. For living or dark undead, I will smite you if you touch him. And yet, for some reason, Rings of Power shows in particular will use that scene in Lord of the Rings to say if it had been filmed today, we would hate it. And yet, I just read here that Durnhelm is Eowyn, who is standing face to face with the Lord of the Nazgul. Oh my god! It's in the book! The winged creature screamed at her, but the ringwraith made no answer and was silent as if in sudden doubt. Very amazement for a moment conquered Merry's fear. He opened his eyes, and the blackness was lifted from them. There, some paces from him, sat the great beast, and all seemed dark about it, and above it loomed the Nazgul lord like a shadow of despair. A little to the left, facing them, stood she whom he had called Durnhelm. But the helm of her secrecy had fallen from her, and her bright hair, released from its bonds, gleamed with pale gold upon her shoulders. Her eyes, grey as the sea, were hard and fell, and yet tears were on her cheek. A sword was in her hand, and she raised her shield against the horror of her enemy's eyes. Eowyn it was, and Durnhelm also, for into Merry's mind flashed a memory of the face that he saw at the riding from Dunhour. The face of one that goes seeking death, having no hope. Pity filled his heart, and great wonder, and suddenly the slow-kindled courage of his race awoke. He clenched his hands. She should not die, so fair, so desperate. At least she should not die alone, unaided. The face of their enemy was not turned towards him, but still, he hardly dared to move, dreading lest the deadly eyes should fall on him. Slowly he began to crawl aside, but the black captain, in doubt and malice intent upon the woman before him, heeded him no more than a worm in the mud. Suddenly the great beast beat its hideous wings, and the wind of them was foul. Again it leaped into the air, and then swiftly fell down upon Eowyn, shrieking, striking with beak and claw. Still she did not blench. Maiden of the Rohirrim, child of kings, slender, but as a steel blade, yet fair yet terrible. A swift stroke she dealt, skilled and deadly. The outstretched neck she clove asunder, and the hewn head fell like a stone. Backward she sprang as a huge shape crashed to ruin, yet vast wings outspread, crumpled on the earth, and with its fall the shadow passed away. A light fell about her, and her hair shone in the sunrise. Out of the wreck rose the Black Rider, tall and threatening, towering above her. With a cry of hatred that stung the very ears like venom, he let fall his mace. Her shield was shivered in many pieces, and her arm was broken. She stumbled to her knees. He bent over her like a cloud, and his eyes glittered. He raised his mace to kill. But suddenly, he too stumbled forward with a cry of bitter pain, and his stroke went wild, driving into the ground. Merry's sword he had stabbed him from behind, shearing through the black mantle and passing up beneath the hauberk, had pierced the sinew behind his mighty knee. "Eowyn, Eowyn!" cried Merry, then tottering, struggling up, with her last strength she drove her sword between crown and mantle, as the great shoulders bowed before her. The sword broke, sparkling into many shards. The crown rolled away with a clang. Eowyn fell forward upon her fallen foe, but lo, the mantle and hauberk were empty. Shapeless they lay now on the ground, torn and tumbled. And a cry went up into the shuddering air, and faded to a shrill wailing, passing with the wind. A voice bodiless and thin that died, and was swallowed up, and was never heard again in that age of this world. And there stood Meriadoc, the hobbit, in the midst of the slain, blinking like an owl in the daylight, for tears blinded him. And through a mist he looked on Eowyn's fair head as she lay and did not move. And he looked on the face of the king, fallen in the midst of his glory. For Snowmane in his agony had rolled away from him again, yet he was a bane of his master. Then Merry stooped, and lifted his hand to kiss it, and lo, Theoden opened his eyes, and they were clear, and he spoke in a quiet voice through low labored. "Farewell, Master Bite-Love," he said. "My body is broken. I go to my fathers, and even in their mighty company, I shall not now be ashamed. I fell the black serpent, a grim morn, and a glad day, and a golden sunsets." Merry could not speak, but wept anew. "Forgive me, Lord," he said at last, "if I broke your command, and yet have done no more in your service than to weep at your parting." The old king smiled. "Grieve not, it is forgiven. Great hearts will not be denied. Live now in blessedness, and when you sit in peace with your pipe, think of me. For never now shall I sit with you in the Meduseld, as I promised, or listen to your herb lore." He closed his eyes, and Merry bowed beside him. Presently he spoke again. "Where is Eomer? For my eyes darken, and I would see him ere I go. He must be king after me, and I would send word to Eowyn. She would not have me leave her, and now I shall not see her again. Dearer than daughter." Again, welcome everyone. "Lord, Lord," began Merry brokenly. "She is—" But at that moment there was a great clamor, and all about them horns and trumpets were blowing. Merry looked around. He had forgotten the war, and all the world beside, and many hours it seemed since the king rode to his fall, though in truth it was only a little while. But now he saw that they were in danger of being caught in the very midst of the great battle that would soon be joined. New forces of the enemy were hastening up the road from the river, and from under the walls came the legions of Morgul. And from the southward fields came footmen of the Harad, with horsemen before them, and behind them rose the huge backs of the Mumakil, with war towers upon them. But northward, the white crest of Eomer had the great front of the Rohirrim, which he had again gathered and marshaled, and out of the city came all the strength of men that was in it, and the silver swan of Dol Amroth was born in the van, driving the enemy from the gates. For a moment he thought flitted through Merry's mind. Where is Gandalf? Is he not here? Could he not have saved the king and Eowyn? But thereupon Eomer stood up in haste, and with him came the knights of the household that still lived and had now mastered their horses. They looked in wonder at the carcass of the fell beast that lay there, and their steeds would not go near. But Eomer leaped from the saddle, and grief and dismay fell upon him as he came to the king's side, and stood there in silence. Then one of the knights took the king's banner from the hand of Gunthilaf, the banner-bearer, who lay dead, and lifted it up. Slowly Theoden opened his eyes. Seeing the banner, he made sign that it should be given to Eomer. "Hail, King of the Mark," he said. "Ride now to victory. Bid Eowyn farewell." And so he died, and knew not that Eowyn lay near him. And those who stood by wept, crying, "Theoden king, Theoden king." But Eomer said to them, "Mourn not overmuch. Mighty was the fallen. Meet was his ending. When his mound is raised, women shall weep. War now calls us." Yet he himself wept as he spoke. "Let his knights remain here," he said, "and bear his body in honor from the field, lest the battle ride over it. Yea, and all these other of the king's men that lie here." And he looked at the slain, recalling their names. Then suddenly he beheld his sister Eowyn as she lay, and he knew her. He stood a moment as a man who was pierced in the midst of a cry by an arrow through the heart, and then his face went deathly white, and a cold fury rose in him, so that all speech failed him for a while. A fey mood took him. "Eowyn, Eowyn," he cried at last. "Eowyn, how come you here? What madness or devilry is this? Death, death! Death! Death take us all! Then, without taking counsel or waiting for the reproach of the men of the city, he spurred headlong back to the front of the great host and blew a horn, and cried aloud for the onset. Over the field rang his clear voice calling, "Death! Ride, ride to ruin and the world's ending!" Éomer is not happy. Well, Éomer will sit on the throne. Éomer takes over. So, Éomer will sit on the throne. And with that, the host began to move, but the Rohirrim sang no more. "Death!" they cried with one voice, loud and terrible, and gathering speed. Like a great tide, their battle swept about their fallen king and passed, roaring away southwards. And still Meriadoc the Hobbit stood there, blinking through his tears, and no one spoke to him. Indeed, none seemed to heed him. He brushed away the tears, and stooped to pick up the green shield that Éowyn had given him, and he slung it at his back. Then he looked for his sword that he had let fall, for even as he struck his blow, his arm was numbed. And now, he could only use his left hand. And behold, there lay his weapon, but the blade was smoking like a dry branch that had been thrust in a fire. And as he watched it, it writhed and withered and was consumed. So passed the sword of the Barrow Downs, work of Westernese. But glad would he have been to know its fate, who wrought it slowly long ago in the North Kingdom, when the Dunedain were young, and chief among their foes was the dread realm of Angmar and the Sorcerer King. So those who are like wondering, so why did the Witch King fall so easily? Why did the Lord of the Nazgul fall so easily? All right. Well, part of it was because of the blade Merry was using against him. His Barrow Downs blade, crafted by the Dunedain. Right? Remember the Barrow Wights? I think I went over what the Barrow Wights actually are, which the Rings of Power gets wrong. Alright? One of those blades. Or at least from the land of where the Barrow Wights lives, basically. So one of those blades. Alright? Was used. So not the Barrow Wights. The Barrow Wights were spirits sent by the Lord of the Nazgul, by the Witch King of Angmar, to the Barrow Downs. But Merry was using a blade crafted by the Dunedain against the Witch King of Angmar. So, without knowing it, Merry was using a blade that could be used against Lord of the Nazgul. No other blade, not though mightier hands had wielded it, would have dealt the foe a wound so bitter, cleaving the undead flesh, breaking the spell that knit his unseen sinews to his will. Men now raised the king, and laying cloaks upon spear truncheons, they made a shift to bear him away north towards the city, and others lifted Éowyn gently up and bore her after him. But the men of the king's household they could not yet bring from the field, for 7 of the king's knights had fallen there, and Dwerwine, their chief, was among them. So they laid them apart from their foes, and the fell beasts, and they set spears about them. And afterwards, when all was over, men returned and made a fire there, and burned the carcass of the beast. But for Snowmane they dug a grave, and set up a stone upon which was carved in the tongues of Gondor and the mark, "Faithful servant, yet master's bane. Lightfoot's fall, swift Snowmane." Green and long grew the grass of Snowmane's howe, but ever black and bare was the ground where the beast was burned. Now slowly and sadly Merry walked beside the bearers, and he gave no more heed to the battle. He was weary and full of pain, and his limbs trembled as with a chill. A great rain came out of the sea, and it seemed that all things wept for Theoden and Éowyn, quenching the fires in the city with great tears. It was through the mist. Presently, he saw the van of the men of Gondor approaching. Imril, Prince of Dulmarath, rode up and drew rein before them. "What burden do you bear, master, men of Rohan?" he cried. "Theoden king," they answered. "He is dead. But Éomer, king now, rides in the battle, he with the white crest in the wind." Then the prince went from his horse, and knelt by the bearer, in honor of the king, and his great onset, and he wept. And rising, he looked then on Éowyn, and was amazed. "Surely here is a woman," he said. "Have even the women of Rohan come to war in our need?" "Nay, one only," they answered. "The Lady Éowyn she is." Sorry, the Lady Eowyn is she, sister of Eomer, and we knew not of her riding until this hour, and greatly we rue it. Then the prince, seeing her beauty, though her face was pale and cold, touched her hand as he bent to look more closely on her. Men of Rohan, he cried, are there no leeches among you? She is hurt, to the death maybe, but I deem that she yet lives. And he held the bright burnish of remembrance that was upon his arm before her cold lips, and behold, a little mist was laid on it, hardly to be seen. Haste now is needed, he said, and he sent one riding back swiftly to the city to bring aid. But he, bowing low to the fallen, bade them farewell, and mounting rode away into battle. So let me see how long our page is there. Okay. And now the fighting waxed furious on the fields of the Pelennor, and the din of arms rose upon high, with the crying of men and the neighing of horses. Horns were blown and trumpets were braying, and the Mumakil were bellowing as they were goaded to war. Under the south walls of the city, the footmen of Gondor now drove against the legions of Morgul that were still gathered there in strength. The horsemen rode eastward to the succor of Eomer, Hurin, the tall, warden of the keys, and the lord of Lossarnach, and Herluin of the great green hills, and Prince Imrahil, the fair, with his knights all about him. Not too soon came their aid to the Rohirrim, for fortune had turned against Eomer, and his fury had betrayed him. The great wrath of his onset had bitterly overthrown the front of his enemies, and the great wedges of his riders had passed clear through the ranks of the Sothrons, discomfiting their horsemen and riding their footmen to ruin. For wherever the Mumakil came, there the horses would not go, but blenched and swerved away, and the great monsters were unfought, and stood like towers of defense. And the Rohirrim rallied about them. And if the Rohirrim at their onset were thrice outnumbered by the Rohirrim alone, soon their case became worse. For new strength came now streaming to the field out of Osgiliath. There they had been mustered for the sack of the city and the rape of Gondor, waiting on the call of their captain. He now was destroyed, but Gothmog, the lieutenant of Morgul, had flung them into the fray, Easterlings with axes, and Viryogs of Khand, Southrons in the scarlet, and out of far Harad, black men like half-trolls with white eyes and red tongues. Some now hastened up behind the Rohirrim, others held westward to hold off the forces of Gondor and prevent their joining with Rohan. It was even as the day thus began to turn against Gondor and their hope wavered that a new cry went up in the city, it being then mid-morning and a great wind blowing, and the rain flying north, and the sun shining. In that clear air, watchmen on the wall saw afar a new sight of fear, and their last hope left them. For Anduin, from the bend at the Hurlond, so flowed that from the city men could look down it lengthwise for some leagues, and the far side you could see any ships that approached. And looking thither, they cried in dismay. For black against a glittering stream, they beheld a fleet, borne up on the wind, dromons and ships of great draught with many oars, and with black sails bellying in the breeze. The Corsairs of Umbar, men shouted, the Corsairs of Umbar! Look, the Corsairs of Umbar are coming! So Belfalas is taken, and the Ether and Lebanon is gone. The Corsairs are upon us. It is the last stroke of doom. Right? And some without order, for none could be found to command them in the city, ran to the bells and told the alarm, and some blew the trumpets, sounded the treat. Back to the walls, they cried, back to the walls, come back to the city before all overwhelmed. But the wind that sped the ships blew all their clamor away. The Rohirrim indeed had no need of news or alarm, for all too well they could see for themselves the black sails. For Eomer was now scarcely a mile from the Harland, and the great press of his first foes was between him and the haven there, while new foes came swirling behind, cutting him off from the prince. Now he looked to the river, and hope died in his heart, and the wind that he had blessed he now called accursed, for the hosts of Mordor were enheartened, and filled with a new lust and fury that came yelling to the onset. Stern now was Eomer's mood, and his mind clear again. He let blow the horns to rally all men to his banner that could come thither, for he thought to make a great shield wall at the last, and stand and fight there on foot till all fell, and do deeds of song on the fields of Pelennor, though no man should be left in the west to remember the last king of the Mark. So he rode to a green hillock, and there set his banner, and the white horse ran rippling in the winds. Out of doubt, out of dark, to the day's rising, I came singing in the sun, sword unsheathing. To hope's end I rode, and to heart's breaking, now for wrath, now for ruin, and a red night fall. These staves he spoke, Yet he laughed as he said them, for once more lust of battle was on him, and he was still unscathed. And he was young, and he was king, the lord of a fell people. And lo, even as he laughed at despair, he looked out again on the black ships, and he lifted up his sword to defy them. And then wonder took him, and a great joy, and he cast his sword up in the sunlight and sang as he caught it. And all eyes followed his gaze, and behold, upon the foremost ship a great standard broke, and the wind displayed it as he turned towards the Harland. There flowered a white tree, and that was for Gondor, but 7 stars were about it, and a high crown above it, the signs of Elendil that no lord had borne for years beyond count. And the stars flamed in the sunlight, for they were wrought of gems by Arwen, daughter of Elrond. And the crown was bright in the morning, for it was wrought of mithril and gold. Thus came Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and Elisar, Isildur's heir, out of the paths of the dead, borne upon the wind from the sea to the kingdom of Gondor. And the mirth of the Rohirrim was a torrent of laughter, and the flashing of swords, and the joy and wonder of the city was the music of trumpets and the ringing of bells. For the hosts of Mordor were seized with bewilderment, and a great wizardry it seemed to them that their own ships should be filled with their foes, and a black dread fell on them, knowing that the tides of fate had turned against them, and their doom was at hand. East rode the knights of Dol Amroth, driving the enemy before them, trollmen and variogs, and orcs that hated the sunlight. South strode Eomer, and his men fled before his face. And they were caught between the hammer and the anvil. For now men leaped from the ships to the quays of the Harland, and swept north like a storm. There came Legolas and Gimli wielding his axe, and Helberod with the standard, and Elladan and Elohir with stars on their brow, and the dour-handed Dunedain, rangers of the north, leading a great valor of the folk of Lebanon and Lamadon, and the fiefs of the south. But before all went Aragorn with the flame of the west, Anduril, like a new fire kindled, Narsil reforged as deadly as of old, and upon his brow was the star of Elendil. So, for those who do not know, Aragorn never... The reluctance in the portrayal of Aragorn in the movies is not book accurate. Aragorn was ready to take up the throne. He's more than ready to take up the throne, but he's not going to do so until Sauron is defeated. So there's no reluctance, there's no doubt in Aragorn. So when he's coming by ship, he is there as king. He is there as king, because he's the rightful heir to Gondor's throne. When he says, right, so where it says the star of Elendil, right, Elendil is Isildur's father. Elendil, who is the one who was slain, right, at the last alliance of elves and men that marked the end of the Second Age and beginning of the Third Age. Right, so that line of kings. So he wanted to be king. He was ready to take up the throne, but he knew he couldn't do so until Sauron was defeated. And so at length Eomer and Aragorn met in the midst of the battle, and they leaned on their swords and looked on one another and were glad. Thus we meet again, though all of the hosts of Mordor lay between us, said Aragorn. Did I not say so at the Hornburg? So you spoke, said Eomer, but hope oft deceives, and I knew not then that you were a man aforesighted. Yet twice blessed is help unlooked for, and never was a meeting of friends more joyful. And they clasped hand in hand, nor indeed more timely, said Eomer. You come none too soon, my friend. Much loss and sorrow has befallen us. Then let us avenge it, ere we speak of it, said Aragorn, and they rode back to battle together. Hard fighting and long labor they had still, for the Southrons were bold men and grim, and fierce in despair, and the Easterlings were strong and war-hardened, and asked for no quarter. And so in this place and that, by burned homestead or barn, upon hillock or mound, under wall or on fields, they gathered and rallied and fought until the day was wore away. Then the sun went at last behind Mindalluin, and filled all the sky with a great burning, so that the hills and the mountains were dyed, as with blood. Fire glowed in the river, and the grass of the Pelennor lay red in the nightfall. And in that hour the great battle of the field of Gondor was over, and not one living foe was left within the circuit of the Rammas. All were slain, save those who fled to die, or to drown in the red foam of the river. Few ever came eastward to Morgul or Mordor, and to the land of Haradrim. Came only a tale from far off, a rumor of the wrath and terror of Gondor. Aragorn and Éomer and Imrahil rode back towards the gate of the city, and they were now weary beyond joy and sorrow. These three were unscathed, for such was their fortune and the skill and might of their arms, and few indeed had dared to abide them or look on their faces in the hour of their wrath. But many others were hurt and maimed or dead upon the field. The axes hewed Forlong as he fought alone and unhorsed, and both Duelin of Morthon and his brother were trampled to death when they assailed the Mumakil, leading their bowmen close to shoot at the eyes of the monsters. Neither Hurlin the Fair would return to Pinoth Galen, nor Grimbold to Grimslade, nor Halbarad to the Northlands, dour-handed ranger. No few had fallen, renowned or nameless, captain or soldier, for it was a great battle, and the full count of it no tale is told. So long afterward, a maker in Rohan said in his song of the mounds of Mundburg, "We heard of the horns and the hills ringing, the sword shining in the South Kingdom. Steeds went striding to the stoning land, as when in the morning war was kindled. There Theoden fell, Thangling mighty, in his golden halls and green pastures, and the northern fields were never returning. High lord of the host, Harding and Gunthla, Dunhir and Derowine, doughty Grimbold, Herfora and Heverbrand, Horn and Festred, fought and fell there in a far country. In the mounds of Mundburg, under molds they lay, with their league fellows, lords of Gondor. Neither Hurluin, the fair to the hills by the sea, nor Furlong, the old, to the flowering vales ever, to Arnok, to his own country, returned in triumph, nor the tall bowmen, Derufin and Duelin, to their dark waters, meres of Morthond under mountain shadows. Death in the morning and a day's ending, lords took and lowly. Long now they sleep under grass in Gondor by the great river. Grey now as tears, gleaming silver. Red then it rolls, roaring water. Foam dyed with blood flamed at sunset, as beacons mountains burned at evening. Red fell the dew in Ramas Ekar. I'm going to take a break for some water, and so ends chapter 6. Oh, you're welcome, Scandrel. So that ends chapter 6, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. So last chapter, chapter 7, and I'll be reading tonight, I should say. The Pyre of Denethor. The Pyre of Denethor. So Denethor is not in his right mind. Hello, Topher. So when we last saw, Denethor is not in his right mind. There's a reason for it, but that's where we left him. So chapter 7. It's not that long. So. When the dark shadow at the gates withdrew, Gandalf still sat motionless, but Pippin rose to his feet as if a great weight had been lifted from him. And he stood listening to the horns, and it seemed to him that they would break his heart with joy. And never in after years could he hear a horn blown in the distance without tears starting in his eyes. But now suddenly his errand returned to his memory, and he ran forward. At that moment Gandalf stirred and spoke to Shadowfax, and was about to ride through the gates. "Gandalf! Gandalf!" cried Pippin, and Shadowfax halted. "What are you doing here?" said Gandalf. "Is it not a law in the city that those who wear the black and silver must stay in the citadel, unless their lord gives them leave?" "He has," said Pippin. "He sent me away, but I am frightened. Something terrible may happen up there. The lord is out of his mind, I think. I am afraid he will kill himself and kill Faramir too. Can't you do something?" Gandalf looked through the gaping gate, and already on the field he heard the gathering sound of battle. He clenched his hand. "I must go," he said. "The Black Rider is abroad, and he will yet bring ruin on us. I have no time." "But Faramir!" cried Pippin. "He is not dead, and they will burn him alive if someone does not stop them." "Burn him alive," said Gandalf. "What is this tale? Be quick." "Denethor has gone to the tomb," said Pippin, "and he has taken Faramir, and he says we are all to burn, and he will not wait. And they are to make a pyre and burn him on it, and Faramir as well. And he has sent men to fetch wood and oil. And I have told Baragon, but I am afraid he won't dare to leave his post. He is on guard. And what can we do anyway?" So Pippin poured out his tale, reaching up and touching Gandalf's knee with trembling hands. "Can't you save Faramir?" "Maybe I can," said Gandalf, "but if I do, then others will die, I fear. Well, I must come, since no other help can reach him. But evil and sorrow will come to this. Even in the heart of our stronghold, the enemy has power to strike us. For his will is that for his will is it is that it is at work. It's at work. And having made up his mind, he acted swiftly, and catching up Pippin and setting him before him, he turned Shadowfax with a word. Up the climbing trees of Minas Tirith they clattered, while the noise of the roar rose behind them. Everywhere men were rising from the despair and dread, seizing their weapons, crying one to another. Rohan has come! Captains were shouting, companies were mustering, many already were marching down to the gates. They met the Prince Imrahil, and he called to them. Whither now, Mithrandir? The Rohirrim are fighting on the fields of Gondor. We must gather all the strength that we can find. You will need every man and more, said Gandalf. Make all haste. I will come when I can, but I have an errand to the Lord Denethor that will not wait. Take command of the Lord's absence. They passed on. As they climbed and drew near to the citadel, they felt the wind blowing in their faces, and they caught the glimmer of morning far away, a light growing in the southern sky. But it brought little hope to them, not knowing what evil lay before them, fearing to come too late. Darkness is passing, said Gandalf, but it still lies heavy on the city. At the gate of the citadel, they found no guard. Then Baragon is gone, said Pippin, more hopefully. They turned away and hastened along the road to the closed door. It stood wide open, and the porter lay before it. He was slain, and his key had been taken. Work of the enemy, said Gandalf. Such deeds he loves. Friend at war with friend. Loyalty divided in confusion of hearts. Now he dismounted and bade Shadowfax return to his stable. For my friend, he said, you and I should have ridden to the fields long ago, but other matters delay me. Yet come swiftly if I call. They passed the door and walked on down the steep winding road. Light was growing, and the tall columns and carven figures beside the way went silently, or slowly, by like gray ghosts. Suddenly the silence was broken, and they heard below them cries and the ringing of swords, such sounds as had not been heard in the hallowed places since the building of the city. At last they came to Rath Dinnan, and hastened towards the house of the stewards, looming in the twilight under its great dome. Stay, stay, cried Gandalf, springing forward to the stone stair before the door. Stay this madness! For there were the servants of Denethor with swords and torches in their hands, but alone in the porch upon the topmost step stood Baragon, clad in the black and silver of the guard, and he held the door against them. Two of them had already fallen to his sword, staining the hallows with their blood, and the others cursed him, calling him outlaw and traitor to his master. Even as Gandalf and Pippin ran forward, they heard from within the house of the dead the voice of Denethor crying, Haste, haste, do as I have bidden, slay me this renegade, or must I do so myself? Thereupon the door which Baragon had held shut with his left hand was wrenched open, and there behind him stood the lord of the city, tall and fell. A light like flame was in his eyes, and he held a drawn sword. But Gandalf sprang up the steps, and the men fell back from him, and covered their eyes, for his coming was like the incoming of a white light into a dark place, and he came in with great anger. He lifted up his hand, and in the very stroke, the sword of Denethor flew up and left his grasp, and fell behind him in the shadows of the house. And Denethor stepped backwards before Gandalf as one amazed. What is this, my lord? Said the wizard. The houses of the dead are no places for the living. And why do men fight here in the Hallows when there is war enough before the gate? Or has our enemy come here even to Rath Dinnan? Since when has the Lord of Gondor been answerable to thee, said Denethor, or may I not command my own servants? You may, said Gandalf, but others may contest your will, when it is turned to madness and evil. Where is your son Faramir? He lies within, said Denethor, burning, already burning. They have set a fire in his flesh, but soon all shall be burned. The west has failed. It shall go up in a great fire, and all shall be ended. Ash and smoke, blown away on the wind. Then Gandalf, seeing the madness that was on him, feared that he had already done some evil deed, and he thrust forward with Baragon and Pippin behind him, while Denethor gave back until he stood beside the table within. But there they found Faramir, still dreaming in his fever, lying upon the table. Wood was piled under it, and high all about it, and all was drenched with oil, and even the garments of Faramir and the coverlets. But as yet no fire had been set to the fuel. Then Gandalf revealed the strength that lay hid in him. Even as the light of his power, it was hidden under his grey mantle. He leaped up onto the faggots, not what you think, and raising the sick man lightly, he sprang down again, and bore him towards the door. But as he did so, Faramir moaned and called on his father in his dream. Welcome, everyone. Denethor started as one waking from a trance, and the flame died in his eyes, and he wept, and he said, Do not take my son from me, he calls for me. He calls, said Gandalf, but you cannot come to him yet. For you must seek healing on the threshold of death, and may find it not. Whereas your part is to go out into the battle of your city, where maybe death awaits you. This you know in your heart. He will not wake again, said Denethor. Battle is vain. Why should we wish to live longer? Why should we not go to death side by side? Authority is not given to you, Steward of Gondor, to order the hour of your death, answered Gandalf. And only the heathen kings, under the domination of the Dark Power, did thus, slaying themselves in pride and despair, murdering their kin to ease their own death. Then passing through the door, he took Faramir from the deadly house, and laid him on the briar on which he had been brought, and which had now been set in the porch. Denethor followed him, and stood trembling, looking with longing on the face of his son. And for a moment, while all were silent and still, watching the Lord in his throes, he wavered. Come, said Gandalf, we are needed. There is much that you can yet do. Well, it is literally a bundle of sticks. That's literally what the definition is, for the original definition is for the term. That's literally what it is. Then suddenly Denethor laughed. He stood up tall and proud again, and stepping swiftly back to the table, he lifted from it the pillow on which his head had lain. Then, coming to the doorway, he drew aside the covering, and lo! He had between his hands a Palantir. So I told you there was a reason why Denethor was going mad, why he was thinking certain things. His mind was being manipulated. Which makes him not the smartest. And as he held it up, it seemed to those that looked on that globe, the globe began to glow with an inner flame, so that the lean face of the Lord was lit, as with a red fire, and it seemed cut out of hard stone, sharp with black shadows, noble, proud, and terrible. His eyes glittered. Pride and despair, he cried. Didst thou think that the eyes of the White Tower are blind? So when people were saying he sees things, he knows things, like, you know, and so forth, it's because, well, he's using something he should not be using. And I'll describe how Palantirs work after I finish this chapter. Okay. Nay, I have seen more than thou knowest, great fool, for thy hope is but ignorance. Go then and labor in healing, go forth and fight, vanity. For a little space you may triumph on the field for a day, but against the power that now arises there is no victory. To this city, only the first finger of its hand has yet been stretched. All the east is moving, and even now the wind of thy hope cheats thee, and wafts up Anduin, a fleet with black sails. The west has failed. It is time for all to depart who would not be slaves. Such counsels will make the enemy's victory certain indeed, said Gandalf. Hope on then, laughed Denethor. Do I not know thee, Mithrandir? Thy hope is to rule in thy stead, to stand behind every throne, north, south, or west. I have read thy mind and its policies. Do I not know that this halfling was commanded by thee to keep silence? Denethor is mad. That he is brought hither to be a spy within my very chamber, and yet in our speech together I have learned the names and purpose of all thy companions. So, with the left hand thou wouldst use me for a little while as a shield against Mordor, and with the right bring up this ranger of the north to supplant me, Aragorn. But I say to thee, Gandalf Mithrandir, I will not be thy tool. I am steward of the house of Anarion. I will not step down to be the daughter chamberlain of an upstart, even were his claim proved to me, till he comes but of the line of Isildur. I will not bow to such a one, last of a ragged house, long bereft of lordship and dignity. Anarion was Isildur's brother. So Isildur and Anarion, two sons of Elendil. Basically, when Denethor is saying House of Anarion, that's his lineage, basically. Still Aragorn is the rightful king because Isildur, I believe, is the older son. So that lineage is the true lineage. Alright? Denethor is just a steward. He basically is warming the seat until Aragorn is ready to assume the throne. That's his purpose as a steward of Gondor, to take care of the city, take care of his people, and keep the seat warm for the true king. What then would you have, said Gandalf, if your will could have its way? I would have things as they were in all the days of my life, answered Denethor, and in the days of my long fathers before me, to the lord of the city in peace, and leave my chair to a son after me, who would be his own master and no wizard's pupil. This is dig at Faramir. But if doom denies this to me, then I will have naught, neither life diminished nor love halved, nor honor abated. To me it would not seem that a steward who faithfully surrenders his charge is diminished in love or in honor, said Gandalf. And at the least you shall not rob your son of his choice while his death is still in doubt. At those words Denethor's eyes flamed again, and taking the stone under his arm he drew a knife, and strode towards the bier. But Baragon sprang forward and set himself before Faramir. So, cried Denethor, thou hadst already stolen half my son's love. Now thou stealest the hearts of my knights also, so that they rob me wholly of my son at the last. But in this, at least, thou shalt not defy my will, to rule my own ends. Come hither, he cried to his servants, come if you are not all recreant. Then two of them ran up the steps to him. Swiftly he snatched up a torch from the hand of one, and sprang back into the house. Before Gandalf could hinder him, he thrust the brand amid the fuel, and at once it crackled and roared into flame. Then Denethor leaped upon the table. Standing there, wreathed in fire and smoke, he took up the staff of his stewardship that lay at his feet and broke it on his knee. Casting the pieces into the blaze, he bowed and laid himself on the table, clasping the Palantir with both hands upon his breast. And it was said that ever after, if any man looked in that stone, unless he had a great strength of will to turn it to the other purpose, he saw only two aged hands writhing in flame. Gandalf, in grief and horror, turned his lord face away and closed the door. For a while he stood in thought, silent upon the threshold, while those outside heard the greedy roaring of the fire within. And then Denethor gave a great cry, and afterwards spoke no more, nor was ever again seen by mortal man. And this is almost done, but I have to take a quick drink because my throat is... Chapter's nearly done, but... So passes Denethor, son of Ecthelion, said Gandalf. Then he turned to Baragon and the Lord's servants that stood there aghast. And so pass also the days of Gondor that you have known. For good or evil they are ended. Ill deeds have been done here, but let now all enmity that lies between you be put away, for it was contrived by the enemy and works his will. You have been caught in a net of warring duties that you did not weave. But think, you servants of the Lord, blind in your obedience, that but for the treason of Baragon Faramir, captain of the White Tower, would now also be burned. Bear away from this unhappy place your comrades who have fallen, and we will bear Faramir, steward of Gondor, to a place where he can sleep in peace, or die if that be his doom. And Gandalf and Baragon, taking up the bier, forward away toward the houses of healing, while behind them walked Pippin with downcast head. But the servants of the Lord stood gazing as stricken men at the house of the dead. And even as Gandalf came to the end of Roth Dinning, there was a great noise. Looking back, they saw the dome of the house crack and smokes issue forth. And then, with a rush and rumble of stone, it fell in a flurry of fire. But still unabated, the flames danced and flickered among the ruins. Then in terror, the servants fled and followed Gandalf. At length they came back to the steward's door, and Baragon looked with grief at the porter. This deed I shall never rue, he said, but a madness of haste was on me. And he would not listen, but drew his sword against me. And taking the key that he had wrested from the slain man, he closed the door and locked it. This should now be given to the Lord Faramir, he said. The Prince of Dol Amroth is in command in the absence of the Lord, said Gandalf, but since he is not here, I must take this on myself. I bid you keep the key and guard it until the city is set in order again. Now at last they passed into the high circles of the city, and in the light of the morning they went their way towards the houses of healing. And these were fair houses set apart for the care of those who were grievously sick, but now they were prepared for the tending of men hurt in battle or dying. They stood not far from the citadel gate, in the sixth circle, nigh to its southward wall, and about them was a garden and a greensward with trees. There was only such a place in the city. There dwelt the few women that had been permitted to remain in Minas Tirith, since they were skilled in healing or in the service of the healers. But even as Gandalf and his companions came carrying the bier to the main door of the houses, they heard a great cry that went up from the field before the gate, and rising shrill and piercing into the sky, passed and died away on the wind. So terrible was the cry that for a moment all stood still, and yet when it had passed, suddenly their hearts were lifted up in such hope as they had not known since the darkness came out of the east. And it seemed to them that the light would grow clearer, and the sun broke through the clouds. But Gandalf's face was grave and sad, and bidding Baragon and Pippin to take Faramir to the Houses of Healing, he went up onto the walls nearby, and there like a figure carved in white he stood in the new sun and looked out. And he beheld with the light sight that was given to him all that had befallen. And when Éomer rode out from the forefront of his battle and stood beside those who lay upon the field, he sighed and he cast his cloak about him again, and went from the walls. And Baragon and Pippin found him standing in thought before the door of the houses when they came out. They looked at him, and for a while he was silent. At last he spoke. "My friends," he said, "and all you people of the city and of the western lands, things of great sorrow and renown have come to pass. Shall we weep or be glad? Beyond hope, the captain of our foes has been destroyed, and you have heard the echo of his last despair. But he is not gone without woe and bitter loss, and that I might have averted but for the madness of Denethor. So long as the reach of our enemy become. Alas, but now I perceive how his will was able to enter into the heart of this very heart of the city." Yeah, sound. Though the stewards deemed that it was a secret kept only by themselves, long ago I guessed that here in the White Tower, one at least of the 7 seeing stones was preserved. In the days of his wisdom, Denethor would not presume to use it to challenge Sauron, knowing the limits of his own strength. But his wisdom failed, and I fear that as the peril of his realm grew, he looked in the stone and was deceived. Far too often, I guess, since Boromir departed. He was too great to be subdued to the will of the Dark Power. He saw nonetheless only those things which the power permitted him to see. The knowledge which he obtained was doubtless often of service to him, yet the vision of the great might of Mordor that was shown to him fed the despair of his heart until it overthrew his mind. "Now I understand what seemed so strange to me," said Pippin, shuddering at his memories as he spoke. "The Lord went away from the room where Faramir lay, and it was only when he returned that I first thought he was changed, old and broken. It was in the very hour that Faramir was brought to the tower that many of us saw a strange light in the topmost chamber," said Baragon. "For we have seen the light before, and it has long been rumored in the city that the Lord would at times wrestle in thought with his enemy." "Alas, then I have guessed rightly," said Gandalf. "Thus the will of Sauron entered into Minas Tirith, and thus I have been delayed here. And here I shall still be forced to remain, for I shall soon have other charges, not Faramir only. Now I must go down to meet those who come. I have seen a sight upon the field that is very grievous to my heart, and greater sorrow may yet come to pass. Come with me, Pippin. But you, Baragon, should return to the Citadel and tell the chief of the guard there what has befallen. It will be his duty, I fear, to withdraw you from the guard. But say to him that, if I may give him counsel, you should be sent to the Houses of Healing, to be the guard and servant of your captain, and to be at his side when he awakes, if that shall ever be again. For by you he was saved from the fire. Go now, I shall return soon." With that he turned away and went with Pippin down towards the lower city. And even as they hastened on their way, the wind brought a grey rain, and all the fires sank, and there arose a great smoke before them. And that ends chapter 7. So, like I said, there's a reason why Denethor, when I say knows certain things, I mean like knows what he's been permitted to know from Sauron. Basically the way a Palantir works, right? Yes, it's a seeing stone, it's called a seeing stone, and again, Rings of Power gets the lore wrong, alright? It's not simply a seeing stone. It's not like you can look into a stone and it shows the future the way they depict it in Rings of Power, basically. It's not like it shows you a potential future or what may or may not come. There has to be another stone. So basically it's a line of communication amongst each stone, basically. So the only way for anything to be shown through the stone would be if someone else, like say Sauron, had the other stone and was showing certain things to whomever had the other stone. So yeah, they treated it like a crystal ball, which is not a crystal ball. It's a seeing stone, but it sees other stones. It's like a line of communication. I'm simplifying it, but I'm simplifying it in a way for you, for those who do not know the lore to understand. So when you see Rings of Power and you see only one stone being used, that's incorrect. It would have to require another stone to communicate with, basically. So when someone is looking into the Palantir, alright, and seeing certain things, someone has to be showing that person something. But you know, the way they have it set up, like no one else would have the stone to be showing these things. Sauron would be the one doing this, but Sauron is, what's he doing? It's just, yeah. So you need multiple stones. You need multiple Palantir. Yep. So, the Palantir Sauron had, that was a way for him to communicate with Sauron and Mordor. But there it is. Alright, yes, I do plan to have a live stream tomorrow. I was very tired yesterday, but I do plan to have a live stream tomorrow, returning to Borderlands. Playing through some Borderlands. Thursday, I'll be returning to a reading stream. I'll be reading chapters 8 and 9 of, well, technically book 5 of The Lord of the Rings, but part 1, chapters 8 and 9 of part 1 of Return of the King. And then finishing, it takes a lot out of you when you're reading so many pages. Finishing part 1 a week from today. Reading the last chapter, chapter 10. And then I won't start book part 2 until probably, rather than stream on Thanksgiving Day, or at least rather than do a reading stream on Thanksgiving Day, or evening I should say, maybe do a gaming stream that evening, and pushing the reading stream to Friday. So I'll be reading chapter 1 of part 2, book 6, of Return of the King, the 28th, basically. And moving forward, basically, I have the schedule laid out, so I know what chapters I'm going to be reading and so forth. If everything goes according to plan, reading stream-wise, I will be finished with Return of the King on December 18th. So a week, literally, before Christmas, I will have The Lord of the Rings finished. And once that happens, I will be taking about a 2-week break from reading streams and returning roughly the first Tuesday, I should say, in the new year. In 2026, in January 2026. Hello, Sunny Brave Megatron. I don't know if you're just popping in now, but if you enjoyed the reading, I'm grateful. If not, I hope you enjoy listening to the replay. So I've read chapters 5 through 7 of book 1 of Return of the King. So I'll be finishing before Christmas. This will be interesting because the Fellowship departs Rivendell on Christmas in the book. So I never played the Jurassic World games. I haven't even watched really any of the Jurassic World movies, so right now I'm playing Borderlands. If I stream Friday, I don't know. It gets very busy this time of year, especially around Thanksgiving and Christmas. If I stream... No, I'm not going to read the Silmarillion next. Not that I don't like the Silmarillion, but you trust me, Jaluk, when I say that for the first roughly third, you all will find it interesting, but at the same time be bored to tears by, like, the dry wording. It reads like a history, basically. It reads like a kind of not necessarily a dry history, but, it's not exactly... does not roll off the tongue like I'm reading, like, a story like Lord of the Rings. Yeah, probably no... Like, I think, like, moving... At least until the end of... At least until, like, after Christmas. Most likely no streams on Saturday, just because, weekends tend to be, like I said, very busy. So probably no streams Saturday, and definitely no streams in the afternoon on Sundays with D&D going on. So Saturdays will probably be mainly not reading streams, watch parties. At least until through Christmas. And then once Return of the King is finished, again, a 2-week break, and I'm going to be returning to a reading stream, going from fantasy to science fiction, more science fiction, with the first Halo book, Halo Fall of Reach, right? I'm not really going to go into that series, because if I were to do that, I would not get a chance to read anything else that year, really, or most of that year. So I'll be reading the first book, The Fall of Reach. Okay, Setting Brave Megatron, you are lucky you were a mod, otherwise I would have the other mods time you out for that blasphemy. Anyway, again, thank you all for hanging out with me. Hope you enjoyed the reading this evening, and I hope you enjoy listening to the replay if you're watching this at a later time. So, tomorrow, if I'm able to do a gaming stream, Borderlands, I'll be returning to Borderlands. Thursday, I'll be reading chapters 8 and 9 of Return of the King. Friday, maybe a gaming stream. Saturday and Sunday, no afternoon streams because of busyness and or D&D. But Talk Nerdy to Us should be on my channel this coming Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. So take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day or evening wherever you are in the world, and I will see you all tomorrow evening as we go back to the mayhem of Borderlands. Peace.